The drizzle of Charleston brought with it the saltiness of the sea and a cold that seeped into my very bones. I stood frozen before the entrance of the Ashford mansion, my worn-out shoes submerged in a layer of slushy mud. But what was making my heart tighten was not the cold, but the vibrant patches of color buried under a pile of household waste. The oak frames I had hand-built, sanded, and polished now lay shattered among black plastic bags and rusted cans. The smell of turpentine and paint mingled with the stench of rotting leftovers in the damp air, creating a nauseating mixture of humiliation. I saw the portrait of Clara, my beloved wife, now defaced by a long streak of filth across her elegant face on the canvas. This was a masterpiece I had spent 3 months in the darkness of the basement to perfect, with every brushstroke, every layer of paint, every highlight in her eyes was a silent confession of love I had for this marriage. Now it lay there, trampled under the rain, like a piece of worthless garbage. "What on earth are you staring at, as if you've lost your soul, Jack?" The shrill and authoritative voice of Mrs. Vivian rang out, cutting through the pitter-patter of rain on the plastic bags. She stepped out from the grand hall, her expensive, tight-fitting gym clothes highlighting a body maintained by luxurious aesthetic treatments. Holding a bottle of green juice, she looked at me with the same eyes full of contempt she usually reserved for outdated relics.
"I cleared out that storage room," she said nonchalantly, taking a sip of juice and looking away. "That space needs to house my new Peloton treadmill. At least that machine makes my daughter proud when she invites friends over. Your trash only breeds cockroaches and fouls the space." I felt the heat of anger rising from my chest, spreading all the way to the top of my head.
But my lips remained tightly pressed, my hands clenched in my jacket pockets until my knuckles turned white. "That wasn't trash, Mother," I replied, my voice so low it was almost swallowed by the sound of the rain. Mrs. Vivian smirked, a dry and mocking laugh. "You poor parasitic painter, do you really think those scribbles are art? Stop deluding yourself, Jack.
If you had any talent at all, we wouldn't have had to keep you like a pet in this house for 3 years." She turned away, her sneakers pounding on the marble floor like hammers hitting my self-esteem. I knelt in the slushy mud, my trembling hands picking up a piece of canvas that had a corner torn away. The freezing rain soaked into my skin, but my gaze no longer contained suffering. "If you had any talent at all, we wouldn't have had to keep you like a pet in this house for 3 years. She turned away, her sneakers pounding on the marble floor like hammers hitting my self-esteem. I knelt in the slushy mud, my trembling hands picking up a piece of canvas that had a corner torn away. The freezing rain soaked into my skin, but my gaze no longer contained suffering.
3 years ago, I stepped into the Ashford house with a heart full of hope and a vibrant palette. I had loved Clara with the purity of a poor artist, believing that love could bridge the gap between 2 social classes. But I soon realized that in this mansion, love was a currency I never had enough of to pay.
The Ashford clan did not build their reputation on kindness. They built it on bank account balances and names on the honor boards of charities. In the elegant dinner parties under crystal chandeliers, I was always the one sitting at the far end of the table, a place where the light never reached, and stories of the stock market always made me feel like a lost soul. Mrs. Vivian and Clara's late father always considered me a stain that needed to be covered up. They forced me to act as a chauffeur for the brother-in-law when he was drunk and made me a plumber when professional help didn't arrive in time. Whenever distinguished guests visited, Mrs. Vivian would introduce me with a voice full of pity. "This is Jack, Clara's husband. He, has quite an artistic soul." The word artist from her mouth carried the bitterness of irony, as if it were a terminal illness that could not be cured. The dark and damp storage room under the basement was my only sanctuary. It was the only place I was allowed to be myself, where the pungent smell of turpentine became my breath. I used all the humiliation, all the insults, and the contemptuous looks to transform them into colors. When I painted, Mrs.
Vivian's screaming upstairs suddenly became distant and harmless. I painted the fake faces hidden behind layers of expensive powder and lipstick. I painted the souls withering inside magnificent evening gowns. Clara, the wife who once promised to stand by me, gradually got caught in the family's toxic whirlpool. She began to look at me with tired eyes whenever I mentioned a small local exhibition.
Jack, when will you stop dreaming and find a practical job at Dad's company? She often asked. Mother is right. Art cannot pay our bills. She didn't understand that art was the only thing preventing me from going insane in this house. Every morning, I had to wake up early to clean bronze statues and tidy the garden. My hands, born to...
I remembered the feeling of other victims of family manipulation who had to swallow their anger to mimkoi. I, too, had learned to turn my face into an expressionless white canvas. I remained silent when Mrs. Vivian used the painting I gave her for her birthday as a mat for the dogs to sleep on. I remained silent when they discussed selling the plot of land I had intended to use as a small studio.
Everyone in the Ashford house thought I was a puppet, a weakling who would bow to any humiliation for a bed in the attic. They didn't know that behind that submissive exterior, a plan was being brewed. I had begun contacting several anonymous art leads online. I had accumulated a collection of works reflecting the brutal reality of Charleston's high society. Mrs. Vivian's act of throwing the paintings into the trash today was not the end. It was the final straw, a signal that Jack's parasitic life had come to an end. I looked at the torn canvas in my hand, feeling the dry paint under my fingers. This painting might have been destroyed, but the idea behind it was not. I stood up, brushed the mud off my clothes, and entered the house with a newfound calm. The storage room was now empty, but my mind was full of the colors of revenge. I will wait for the most opportune moment to strike the final blow. Then Mrs. Vivian will understand that her trash is the world's treasure, and the painter she despised will be the last one smiling. The next morning, the Charleston sky was still as gray as an abandoned canvas. I woke up in the cramped attic room, the smell of mold from the old walls clinging to my lungs. Downstairs, Mrs. Vivian's new Peloton treadmill began to operate, creating steady and soulless rhythms. I looked down at my hands.
The scratches from picking up the torn paintings last night were still bleeding.
But my attention was caught by a strange message on the art forum I participated in under the pseudonym The Ghost. I found a piece of your abandoned soul at a trash pile on Pine Street. If you are the author of these brushstrokes carrying the breath of indignation, please answer me. My heart pounded, a feeling of anxiety mixed with excitement surging in my chest.
The sender of the message was Arthur Vance, the most influential art critic in the South. He was famous for having eyes that could see diamonds among pebbles, and he had just found me. I remembered the stories of others who secretly swapped their fate, a dangerous but hopeful gamble. I replied briefly, that soul was not abandoned. It was only waiting to be reborn.
A few hours later, while I was busy cleaning the stains on the Ashford family's silverware, the phone in my pocket vibrated continuously. Arthur Vance wanted to buy everything that remained and commission 10 new paintings. The price he offered made me stop breathing for a few seconds. $50,000 for each work. I looked at Mrs.
Vivian, sitting in an armchair, panting after her workout while berating the maid for brewing the tea too strong. "Jack, what are you standing there for? Get me the latest Vogue magazine," she barked without looking at me. I bowed my head, a faint smile appearing on my lips that she could never see. "Yes, Mother." In my head, numbers began to dance. $50,000, double the hidden debts of those who lived fake lives. I began to live a dramatic double life. By day, I was still the submissive son-in-law, hands stained with soap and dirt. By night, when the entire Ashford mansion sank into the sleep of vanity, I snuck out to the old warehouse, which was now just a dark corner behind the treadmill. I painted with madness, with all the bitterness I had swallowed for the past 3 years. The smell of turpentine now was no longer the smell of escape, but the smell of liberation. Each of my brushstrokes was powerful and sharp, cutting into the canvas as Mrs. Vivian's words cut into my self-esteem. The works under the name The Ghost began to cause a storm in the anonymous art collecting circles. Meanwhile, the glamorous curtain of the Ashford family began to show financial cracks.
Clara's father was having trouble with real estate investments, and they needed a reputation boost to maintain their position. Mrs. Vivian, with her characteristic arrogance, decided they needed to own a painting by The Ghost, the latest phenomenon of high society. I heard that anyone who owns a painting by The Ghost is considered to have peak aesthetic taste and true wealth, she declared at dinner.
"Clara, you must tell your father to find a way to buy one at any cost. We cannot let the Miller family surpass us." Clara looked at me, then at her mother, her eyes momentarily showing fatigue. "Mother, their prices are skyrocketing. Do we really need it?" Mrs. Vivian slammed the table, the expensive porcelain clinking. "We are the Ashfords. We don't buy cheap things. We buy class." I silently poured more wine into her glass, feeling the ultimate irony spreading in the room. The woman who just threw my paintings into the trash was now ready to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy back that very trash under another name. I felt like a director controlling a play where the actors were all blind. Every time the phone notified a new auction, I felt light,
as if a chain was being cast off.
My anonymous account filled up, but I still wore worn-out work clothes and ate leftover bread in the kitchen. This contrast brought me an indescribable pleasure, a silent and sweet revenge. Mrs. Vivian began to brag to friends about contacting the ghost's representative. She didn't know that the representative was Arthur Vance, and he was laughing at her with me during late-night calls. She wants a painting showing the purity of the aristocracy. Arthur laughed loudly over the phone. I replied that my artist only paints what belongs to the truth. I decided to give her a truth she would never forget. I began sketching the most important painting of my career, the Betrayal. I chose the largest canvas, a type of fabric I had to scavenge piece by piece from the trash to assemble. I wanted this painting to carry the breath of decay, of trampled dreams, the red of anger, the black of contempt, and the gold of the fake vanity that the Ashford family always worshipped. Every morning, seeing Mrs. Vivian running on the machine that took the place of my old studio gave me more inspiration. Her arrogance was the perfect catalyst for my drawings. Tension in the Ashford house escalated as creditors began calling more often. Mrs. Vivian became even more irritable and dictatorial, venting all her frustration on me. The useless type like you, all day only lingering in the house, helping nothing for this family, she shouted when I accidentally dropped a silver spoon. I looked into her eyes, no longer afraid or submissive, only a terrifying calm. I'm sorry, Mother. I'll pay more attention.
She didn't realize that the son-in-law she was insulting was the only lifebuoy her family was trying to cling to. The preparation for the major exhibition in Charleston was complete. Arthur Vance had arranged for the Betrayal to be the focus of the entire auction night. The Ashford family had prepared their most magnificent clothes, ready to appear as generous art patrons. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching them walk to the car with all their hollow pride. "Jack, you stay home to watch the house and clean it up," Clara instructed before closing the car door. I watched the black limousine disappear behind the mansion gates. It was time for the ghost to appear. I entered the basement, changed out of my worker's clothes into a high-end tailored suit I had secretly bought last month. The smell of new fabric replaced the smell of turpentine and dirt. I looked at myself in the mirror, no longer the parasite Jack, but the author of the works about to change the fate of the Ashford family. This battle was not just about art. It was about reclaiming the soul that had been discarded. I took the car keys, a car I had rented specifically for tonight, and headed toward the exhibition center. Tonight, Charleston would witness the collapse of a legend and the rise of a naked truth. And I would be the last one holding the palette of my own life. The Charleston Art Gallery tonight smelled of ultimate luxury and intense deceit. The scent of expensive perfume from magnificent evening gowns mingled with the smell of new wood from high-end frames to create a suffocating atmosphere. Spotlights focused on the works, but the main attraction was the bright red velvet curtain in the center of the hall. Mrs.
Vivian stood there, holding a glass of red wine, her face radiant with the self-satisfaction of someone who had reached the pinnacle of society. She was surrounded by upper-class ladies, constantly bragging about her refined aesthetic taste in discovering the talent of the ghost. True art needs an eye that can see the soul, and I knew right away the ghost was a genius from the first sketches, she declared with a theatrical tone.
Clara stood next to her mother, wearing a champagne-colored silk dress that masked her true exhaustion. She smiled thinly, but her eyes constantly sought attention from the photographer's lenses. I walked into the hall, the perfectly tailored black suit, making me feel like I was no longer the old, worn-out painter. The sound of my heels pounding on the marble floor carried the rhythm of a debt collector.
Arthur Vance approached me, nodding respectfully before stepping onto the podium to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, the moment we have all been waiting for has arrived, Arthur's voice echoed through the silent hall. The greatest work of the ghost, titled The Betrayal, will officially be revealed. The red velvet curtain fell amidst the astonishment of hundreds of guests.
A wave of murmurs began to spread like a stone thrown into a still lake. On the giant canvas, the image of a woman with a face distorted by contempt was throwing pieces of soul into a pile of filthy trash. Every wrinkle of malice, every sharp gaze of hers was drawn in haunting detail. The background of the painting was the trash pile at the Ashford estate with its unmistakable iron gate. And the woman in the painting was none other than Mrs. Vivian in her gym clothes that day. The red paint streaked across the fabric looked like a horrific crime scene. The wine glass in Mrs. Vivian's hand fell to the floor, shattering into thousands of glass shards. "What is this? This is an insult!" she screamed, her face flushed red with humiliation.
She turned to Arthur Vance, her hands trembling as she pointed at the painting. "How dare you allow this to appear here?" Arthur just smiled calmly, his eyes turning toward me as I slowly stepped out from the crowd. "Perhaps you should ask the author himself, Mrs. Vivian," Arthur said with an implied tone. I stopped in front of her, looking straight into the eyes that were dilated with horror.
"Hello, Mother. I hope you are satisfied with the work you helped create," I said, my tone sharp as a razor. Clara gasped, her hand covering her mouth to prevent a scream from escaping. "Jack, you are the ghost?" The bitter truth enveloped the space, heavy and suffocating like the air before a storm. Mrs. Vivienne tried to regain some hollow authority. She roared, "You deceived us. You used Ashford money to do these things?" I smirked, a smile containing 3 years of patience and humiliation. Ashford money? You threw these paintings in the trash to make room for a treadmill, remember? You yourself called them trash, something not worth a penny. I repeated her every bitter word. Right then, a middle-aged man with a powerful demeanor stepped forward, Mr. Blackwood, the Ashford family's arch-rival in business.
$1 million for this painting, Mr. Blackwood declared, his voice booming with decisiveness. "I want to hang it in the main lobby of my company to remind everyone of the rot hidden behind the aristocratic mask." Mrs. Vivian seemed ready to collapse on the spot. Her painstakingly built reputation had crumbled in an instant.
She rushed forward, intending to scratch the painting, but Arthur Vance stopped her in time.
"Don't touch it, ma'am. This property already has an owner," Arthur said coldly. I looked at Clara, the wife who was once my hope, now just a pathetic shadow beside her mother. "Did you ever really love me, or was it all just for revenge?" Clara asked, choking. I looked at her one last time, feeling like I was looking at a stranger from another lifetime.
"I once loved you more than life itself, until you chose to stand with your mother's cruelty." Her silence was the most painful answer, much like the moments when families realize their chosen victims have finally escaped. I turned to Mr. Blackwood and signed the transfer contract right in front of hundreds of witnesses. The $1 million check sat in my pocket, but the more valuable thing was the self-respect I had reclaimed. Mrs.
Vivian began to wail, a familiar martyred suffering to draw the crowd's pity. But this time, no one approached her, only looks of contempt and mocking whispers. The monster had been driven away, and the cage holding my soul was completely wide open. I walked out of the exhibition hall, not bothering to look back at the ruins of a clan whose truth had just been exposed. The Charleston night was still cold, but my chest was now warm with the fire of freedom. This was not just an art exhibition. This was a cleansing. And I, the parasitic painter, was the one who painted the ending for their arrogance. The dawn of Charleston shone brightly through the new window, carrying the saltiness and cleanliness of the sea breeze. I stood watching from afar, seeing the garbage truck just leaving Pine Street, carrying away the last fragments of the humiliation Mrs. Vivian had thrown away. She ran frantically out to the alley, her designer clothes disheveled and her eyes crazed, searching through the empty trash cans. She was looking for the millions of dollars she had thrown away with her own hands, but it was all too late. The Peloton treadmill still stood there in the dark basement, a soulless symbol of the Ashford family's arrogance and stupidity. My phone vibrated with a message full of manipulation from Clara. "You must forgive Mother. She was only worried about our future. Family is family, Jack." I read it twice, feeling the familiar guilt trying to take root in my mind. The old Jack, who had spent 3 years trying to win their approval, might have been moved. But that Jack had died somewhere between the trash pile and the brilliant lights of the exhibition night. I deleted the message without responding. After that, I blocked Mrs. Vivian's number. I blocked Clara's number too, one by one, cutting the toxic threads that had bound me for so long. No more concessions, no more evenings of humiliation, no more playing the role of the disappointing son-in-law. Freedom tasted like the morning air in Charleston, salty and pure. I realized that some bridges, once burned, are best left as ashes. 1 year later, I stood in my own large studio, watching the sunbeams dance on new canvases. Blackwood had sent me a photo. The painting, The Betrayal, now hangs prominently in his rival corporation's lobby as a permanent reminder of the Ashfords' hypocrisy. I looked down at my hands, now only stained with paint, no longer the mud of enslaved labor. Losing a fake family to gain self-respect was the best deal I ever had. The monster has been driven away. The cage is wide open, and I am finally, truly free.